Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. On this show, I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. Today, I'm super excited. We have a legend on the show, Andrew Quady from Quady Winery. Before I formally introduce him, I want to give a quick sponsor message. Today's episode, it's sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. Today, we have Bianca Harmon on the show. She's one of our D2C strategists at Barrels Ahead. How's it going, Bianca?
Going great, Drew. Looking forward to talking to Andy today.
Yes, I'm super excited to talk with Andrew Quady. He's the co-founder and CEO of Quady Winery in Madera, California. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you, Drew and Bianca. It's going to be fun to join you two. And I think I never get tired of telling the story of Quady Winery. So
yes, and you know what? In full candidness, I got to tell our listeners, I can't wait to hear it. We started the show and I forgot to hit record, so this is actually the second time you get to tell it. So Andrew, please tell me, how did you start? How did you get into the wine business?
So our first effort at making wines under our own label came about in 1975 when I was, I guess I'd been a winemaker for about three years then in 75. Right. So any case, Daryl Quady, who is a legend in the wine world himself, especially when it comes to things like sherry and port. He asked me to make a port for him from Zinfandel grapes that were grown without irrigation in the elevated part of Amador County, about the 2,000-foot elevation, something like that. So that was, at the time I was working for a winery called Lodi Vintners. And I was the winemaker there, and I was able to let the owners of the company allow me to use their equipment and everything to make this port, which is going to be under my own label and such. So we made the port, and I managed to get it. I'd changed jobs actually shortly after I made the port, so I've had a friend though in the Napa Valley who let me move the port over to his winery, barreled it down there for a few years, and then we got it bottled at another winery over in Napa, and that was the first Quady port, and I made 1,600 cases of it.
Oh wow!
So the reason it was such a large amount was that the tank size where I was working, the smallest tank they had was about 30,000 gallons.
Oh.
And I wanted to be able to put at least a couple of feet of pumice on the bottom of the port so we could pump it over.
Yeah.
So that ended up making about, ended up with 1,600 cases of pretty good Zinfandel port. So that's how I got started. That's
great. Now, so you had 1,600 cases. How did you sell? 1,600?
So
finished.
That was really important part of it, as you could imagine, because as it turned out, Daryl Quady really only wanted 100 or so.
Oh no!
He had this consortium of stores. I think altogether with him and his consortium of stores, they bought maybe 300 or 400 cases. So when I got in the port business, I don't know what happened, but at the time that I changed jobs and I was working for a really big winery in Madera called, it went by different names. The old name for it was Mission Bell. The time I was working there, it was called Hubline.
Oh, yeah.
Hubline Wines, and Hubline was a company known for vodka. They owned, I think they might have owned Smirnoff vodka in those days. So, but they were in the wine business. They owned Mission Bell, and they owned Beaulieu, and they owned Inglenook. And I worked at the facility in Madera. Okay. And so I had, after about the time we got the port bottled, and it was ready to sell, and Daryl had received his 100 cases or so, I started getting phone calls from people about the fact that they wanted to sell my port or something. I got a phone call from a company in San Francisco that wanted to sell it there, and a company wanted to sell it nationwide. And pretty soon, after a few years, the 1,600 cases was about gone.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And that's how I got going.
That's how you got going. But before that, now's the time to ask this. You had a brief career in the explosive industry?
Well, yes. So before I went up to Davis and got my master's degree in food science, winemaking, I was working I did chemical engineering in college. So I had a degree in engineering, and I was working for a company that military, and I didn't really that much. I mean, it was an interesting job, a lot of technical problems and challenges, but after I met my wife and we got married, my main interest was food and wine, and I just sort of liked to cook, and we had subscribed to the Time Life series of cookbooks, which came every few months, and I was just starting to learn about wine, and then one of the guys at the place where I was working told me to read this column by Robert Balzer for the LA Times, and Balzer was always talking about exciting new things in the wine business. And so I thought, well, yeah, maybe if I change jobs, I might just go back to school and become a winemaker, and the chemistry wouldn't hurt me at all. See, so that's what I did. And one day I got a phone call. Actually, it was New Year's Eve, and they'd had an accident at the fireworks factory, which had a fire there, and a building which contained a lot of rockets had caught on fire, and the rockets were taking off on their own.
Oh, sure.
Oh my God.
So it was quite a bit of an excitement that night in Fontana, just where the business was located. And the rockets went up in the air, and the payload wasn't a high explosive. It was just a bunch of aluminum foil. Actually, the rocket was a countermeasure, a military countermeasure intended to fool the enemy's radar by creating a bunch of false targets. So they launched the National Guard and all sorts of things. And in the net result, though, the plant decided to close, and they laid everybody off, which was great because I now had 6 months of unemployment.
Oh,
and I got myself admitted to UC Davis, and was on my way to getting my second degree in food science, actually, with a specialization in winemaking.
Oh, wow.
So there we go.
That's how you made it in. If it wasn't for that mishap at the fireworks factory, get the leeway. So I gotta just start. So talk to me about Muscat. You're synonymous with that.
Hold on, I got to turn this phone off here. We'll stop it here. Okay. So, what was the question?
No, I just want to get right into
talk about Muscat. That's a good place to. That's a good place to talk to. So we're done talking about port for a while. So the Muscat thing, what Laurel and I did after I graduated, is we took our net worth, which was maybe, I don't know, a couple $1,000s or something like that, and we blew the whole thing on a trip to France. And came back and went on food stamps. But in any case, before that, when we were in France, one of the places we went to was some kind of a little restaurant near in the town of Orange, which is in the Rhone Valley. See, and actually, when we were in Orange, they have a Roman amphitheater there, sort of almost like the Colosseum in Rome, but it's in the middle of France. And so it's a little Colosseum, still probably bigger than a lot of our football stadiums. But in any case, so they had this thing, and we were wandering around there, and then we wanted to have lunch, and so we found this restaurant and ordered the price fixed lunch, which came with a dessert, which was a piece of cake, and the cake was accompanied by a small glass of Muscat wine. And this was a wine. Are you familiar with Muscat Baume de Venise?
Oh, yes.
One of you guys?
Very much so.
So it was Baume de Venise. So it's made nearby the city of Orange. And we thought it was really an exciting thing, and it was really delicious. And the cake and the wine went so well together. And it just seemed the perfect way to finish a lunch. And we'd really never had a dessert wine like that before. I've had sauternes, but in the whole my whole experience at UC Davis and all the organoleptic things, I'd never had a fortified Muscat. Like Baume de Venise, which is really, it's a fortified juice, but they get the Muscat grapes nice and ripe, and they get the fermentation started, and maybe it ferments a little bit, not much, enough to create 1 or 2% alcohol, let's say, and then they add neutral spirits, or they had actually some kind of a grape neutral spirit to it,
brandy,
and that was Baume de Venise.
Okay.
And no oak age at all. The whole thing is done in stainless steel. So you make it in the fall, you bottle it in the spring, and by the next fall you make another batch. Very simple. So after by the time I got to Madeira, and I was working there, and we were selling all the port. I started in the port business, actually, with a little 40-foot square winery that we put up behind our house. And we'd make wine there on evenings and weekends. And then the farm advisor for Madera County, one day, I forget whether he came by or just called me up on the telephone. He wanted to know if I might be interested in some Orange Muscat grapes. And I had those. I'd worked with those grapes actually in Davis as a student. We had a project one year in the winemaking part where we were supposed to make a wine from these Orange Muscat grapes, because they had some growing at UC Davis. But as far as I knew, there weren't really any commercially grown in California at that time. And I thought it might be fun to make another wine besides port, especially a white dessert wine, which would be another sort of expand our offerings of dessert wines by having both. I had been thinking of a white port, but now these Muscat vines appeared, and I remembered the Baume de Venise wine in France, and I thought, okay, what if I made these grapes into something along the lines of the Baume de Venise? And so that was really the first effort into Muscat grapes. And the variety is different from Muscat Blanc or or Moscato Bianco or
Mhm.
Muscat Canelli, which is all the same thing, which is the main variety that is used in France to make Baume de Venise, and
Mhm.
also the main Muscat variety grown in Italy and the better wine regions, which is near Moscato d'Asti, for example.
Yes.
That's all this Muscat Canelli, Moscato Bianco. So, but Orange Muscat was different because it had this orange apricot
Mhm.
character, and it had a little bit of like bitterness to it.
Mm.
Turns out it's a very high phenolic for a white grape. And so we arranged to buy some from
Mhm.
these growers. And it was down in Reedley is where their their vineyard was.
Where's Reedley?
Oh, it's about an hour south of here.
Okay.
Yeah. I think what happened is there's a winery down there called Chateau La Salle, which, if you remember, that was once a brand of the Christian Brothers.
Yes.
And so the Christian Brothers had a facility down there that made this a white sweet Chateau La Salle, I think they called it. And then they also had a brandy operation down there in Reedley. So, but some farmers from Madeira had bought the vineyards, not the winery. They'd bought the vineyards, and so they owned this. They owned a lot of Muscat grapes, among which was about a 10-acre parcel of this variety, Orange Muscat.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Most people had really never heard of. So I got the idea of trying to make a nice dessert wine, and what I did differently than what they do in Baume de Venise is probably the skin contact is a really important thing. I decided to give it some skin contact to increase the varietal character and give it more body. And then
it also has a beautiful color.
Yeah, and of course, then you get the color too, right? You get that golden color comes out, and then give it a little age in French oak to add another level of complexity that way, and that was Essensia.
And that's how Essensia. Now, how did the name Essensia come from?
I'm sorry, the name?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it was the essence of the grape because of the skin contact period. So we were capturing the essence of the grape. No relation to the Hungarian wine of the same, but we were actually fortunate enough to be able to get that name trademarked because in those days there was none of the Hungarian Essensia for sale in the United States. And so they let me trademark it. And so in any case, so we had Essensia, within a few years though, we were selling more of that than we were the port. And that's how we really got going in this business and down the road to making a lot more in different kinds of Muscat wines.
Yeah, then when I first got my start in the wine industry back in the early 90s in San Francisco, I definitely remember selling the Essensia and the Elysium, and there was nothing really like that in the other sweet wine category. It was a very special.
You're right, and to mention Elysium too, like a red sweet dessert wine like that had never been done. Of course, everybody's had port, right? Which is a red sweet dessert wine, but this was one with just 15% alcohol, and which was bottled when it's young and fresh. So we were really, just like with Essensia, capturing the aromatics of the Orange Muscat grape. The Elysium was capturing the special aromatics of the Muscat Hamburg, which in California is called Black Muscat. And that grape variety, I was surprised, but a grower, how we get in Black Muscat, a grower up in Manteca had some Black Muscat. And Drew, do you remember the Novitiate Winery at all?
I don't.
So Novitiate is in Los Gatos. So they're a religious order that had a winery, okay? And their most popular wine was made from Muscat Hamburg. And they had, but they were not doing very well financially. And so but on the other hand, they had got this guy up in Manteca to put in some acreage of Muscat Hamburg. And then they went broke. And so he called me because someone had told him, well, Andy Quady is buying Muscat grapes, call him. So we started buying this guy's black Muscat, and that's where Elysium came from. And the neat thing about it was that if you got those grapes really ripe, they start to smell like roses, or they make the wine smell like roses. It's amazing. Oh, wow. And my professor at Davis, I talked to him about this. Well, actually, I can't remember. It might have been in one of his classes, but beta-phenethyl alcohol, which is the aroma of roses, especially red roses, is found in wine and found in cognac.
Really?
It's metabolized. It's generated by yeast actions in grapes and on certain precursors that come from certain varieties of grapes. And the Muscat Hamburg is the one that has the most recognizable level of it in there. So it was sort of, so we did a lot of experiments with the guy in his vineyard and pulling leaves to get more sunlight on the grapes, which seemed to bring more flavor, and getting the grapes to a very high level of sugar. Like we like to harvest them around over 26 bricks, which is way high for most, but so we're picking these things in October, which everybody else was picking them in early September or something.
Yeah. Do you have to worry? I mean, with like when people are doing late harvests, you want the botrytis because you want that rot, that mold. But sometimes if there's too much rain, it can.
Well, Bianca, that's right. See, most people who are trying to make, and should have gotten into the late harvest thing a little bit, but most wineries who are thinking of sweet wine are thinking of something along the line of a Sauterne,
right,
or a Trochanbeeren Auslese or something, and those are botrytis affected, right?
Right.
And so what I was doing was just working with non-botrytis affected grapes, and not even raisins. They were starting to shrivel a little bit if you pick them at 26 or 27, but we didn't want them raisin. We wanted them to not have a raisin taste, to have the flavor
of that bright fruit.
Right. So we were doing something quite different. And also from a business standpoint, you didn't need to sell it for $50 for a half bottle. You could sell it for like $10 for a full bottle.
Yeah,
right. It's interesting though that I guess I was just asking because I worked at a winery here in St. Helena where we had a Muscat and we had a Moscato Frizzante, and our Muscat grapes were still coming in earlier, like right around sometimes the Sauvignon Blanc would be. So it's interesting to me that you're still harvesting in late October for it.
Yeah, on the black Muscat. The orange does come in early, and also the Muscat Canelli. It comes in early. We use all three now. That's the Canelli is the first one. In fact, here in Madeira this year, we're about. I think we're finished with the Canelli and half finished with the orange, and we're just on September 1st.
Were you affected at all by we're in August right now, and I know you had some big fires in Madeira earlier this year by Yosemite. Were you affected by those?
Oh, not this year. We haven't had any. Yeah. Well, you know what? There was one earlier in Yosemite. One up by Wawona Grove or something like that. Grant Grove. Any case, and but it wasn't. The wind was blowing the wrong way, and we didn't get any smoke from that.
Oh, thankfully. Yeah. Thanks, God. I hear the news and I hear the cities, and I always kind of wonder what happens there. But getting back to black Muscat here, I'll just ask a random question. Why does the religious orders like Muscat so much? Seems like both of the Orange Muscat and black Muscat came from sacrificial or sacramental wines. And
that's a good question. I don't know. They like sweet wine. See, if it wasn't Muscat, it would still probably be sweet frequently. And beats me. I don't know.
Yeah, it just kind of crossed my.
What's the religious connection with sweet red wine for
Yes.
sacrificial use? Sacramental, not sacrificial. For
Sacramental.
sacramental use. Yeah.
Sacramental use. So Black Muscat, you did the sweet. What happens if you do a dry version
Of Black Muscat?
Yeah.
I've never tried it.
Yeah,
And
I don't think I've ever had one.
there are of course dry versions of Moscato Bianco,
Mm-hmm.
and like especially in Alsace, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are very successful.
Yeah, I was just
And,
I was
but-
wondering if there's a very good reason why. Oh, you never want to do that.
You know what? Here's one thing about Muscat grapes, and one of the reasons why winemakers like to make sweet wine out of them.
Mhm.
It's because they taste like dessert.
Mm.
They're very floral, and the floral thing. It's almost, why do you need that flowery thing for a dry wine? It's
Mhm.
like most people who like dry wine, they like fruit, but they don't want it to just taste like a bowl of flowers, you know. So I think
Yeah,
that's
just-
it.
Kind of
So
just-
do
You can make them into dry wines, and you could make the Black Muscat into a dry wine.
So does your Black Muscat actually red in color? Because there's very few grapes that actually produce a red juice. So does the Black Muscat produce that darker juice color?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's
Interesting.
not a real in black wine, but it's a light red.
Yeah, interesting.
Oh. So then you kind of moved into talk to me about the Electra line. That's something I'm not as familiar with.
So we came out with the first Electra in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
My winemaker and I were sort of thinking about other types of wine that could be made from these Orange Muscat, and also we had some Muscat Canelli grapes that we were working with for Essensia. And so at that point, we'd only made Essensia. So we're making a 15% alcohol sweet wine.
Mm-hmm.
So both Mike Blaylock, my winemaker at the time, and myself, we'd both been to college and studied, modern winemaking, and were understood how you could make really nice, sweet white wines
Mm-hmm.
by using sterile filtration
Mm.
to prevent fermentation. So when you've got a wine that's 15% alcohol, like Essensia, and it also has got a level of sugar in that same range,
Mm.
that same 15% sugar, 15% alcohol, something like that, the yeast won't, if there's yeast in there, they won't ferment. They won't
Mhm.
ferment it. There's a formula that if you take the alcohol and you multiply it by one number and you add on the sugar, and if the number exceeds some number, then which is called a deli unit, then it won't ferment.
Mm.
So the great thing about that is you can take that wine, you can put it in an oak barrel, and you can age it that way, and you don't need to worry about it re-fermenting. It's never going to re-ferment in the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have let's say a 10% alcohol wine
Mm-hmm.
with 10% sugar in it, you can't bottle that. You can't put that in a barrel. You can't do anything with it except keep it real cold so it won't ferment, and then filter out all those yeast using sterile filtration.
Mm.
You get all the yeast filtered out, and then bottle it with 0 yeast in there, or a very, very small number, tiny numbers of yeast.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you did that right and you were real careful, your wine wouldn't re-ferment. So that's what they do.
And if you did it wrong, you'd have an explosion factory again.
Well, you just have your bottles blowing up, or they blow all the caps, see?
Yeah.
Or people would unscrew it and they'd lose half their bottle because it would fizz right out the top as soon as they unscrewed the top,
Yep.
So that's how you make Moscato d'Asti,
Mm-hmm.
and all the low alcohol German wines
Mm.
make that way too. And so You learn about that in school, and you learn about millipore filters and stuff, and how do you have a sterile atmosphere in your bottling setup and all that stuff. So Mike Blaylock and I decided to we would experiment with that, and we made and so what we did is the first one we made, we took some fermenting Orange Muscat juice and tasted it. And when it tasted really nice, without measuring the alcohol or anything, just tastes good now, we put it in the refrigerator and stopped the fermentation. And later on, after the yeast had sort of settled out to the bottom, we tasted it, and we tasted, this is wonderful. And then we checked the alcohol. It was only 4.5%.
Oh, wow.
And so we thought, oh, look at it's whatever. Okay, fine. We'll bottle it 4.5%. And so we ended up being 1% lower alcohol than Moscato d'Asti. But that's the way we've made Essensia or Electra ever since. And then the red Electra, which we made with the Muscat Hamburg,
is it still about 4.5%? The Electra?
Yeah, Electra is only 4.5%.
I had no idea. That's got to be. It took a while for the low alcohol wines to really. They're all the rage right now.
I know, and ours is even lower than Moscato d'Asti. It's got to be the lowest one out there, almost. Maybe there's some that are down around 2. I don't know. If you get low enough, you don't need to even call them wine. In fact, you can't call them wine.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, in Europe, you've got to have at least 7% to put the word wine on the label.
Really? What if it's like 6? What do they call it?
They call it partially fermented grape juice.
Oh,
wow! I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we our importer in the United Kingdom. That's why he didn't want to import it. Also, you know what? He was doing so well with the Essensia. Essensia was in all these nice restaurants in the UK. And why did he want to mess up a good deal by just selling something that's cheaper, right? So, yeah. So we never did that. But
that was in the 90s.
Yeah, we do sell it in Holland now. And in Germany. I think I know we're selling the low alcohol Electra in Holland.
Yeah, I think the timing is just perfect for Electra right now. And also you're one of the Essensia, the skin contact was one of the original orange wines, which is also all the rage right now. Having all the skin contact fermentation. Exactly.
Orange wine. And then of course that all gets all confused with Orange Muscat and everything. But yeah, right. By the way we made Essensia, we were making wine from Orange Muscat grapes, and it sort of tastes like orange by the way it happens to be made and in the method known as orange wine making, which is really a little bit more fermenting on the skins than we do.
Yeah,
we just do some soaking for a few days.
It is funny though. I see it now in all the bars. They'll have red wines, white wines, orange wines, and I always think of Essensia, and I'm like, oh, look at all these. This is very different. Yeah.
Yep.
So that was in the 90s. We're just kind of going. I'm just kind of going through the whole chronicle history of you, but so you did make the break from Madeira. Now you have a winery up in Oregon, Quady North. That your son.
What? Yeah. So I'll tell you about Quady North. So. My wife and I really tried very hard to discourage our children from going into the wine business.
Why?
Because there wasn't any money in it. And we felt we didn't want to have to support them with our winery, which barely was making enough to support us. See? So don't go in the wine business. But our son, so we wanted our son to become a lawyer because my wife is a CPA. So I thought a CPA and a lawyer in the family would be about right. So in any case, he studied, he went off to UC Santa Cruz and he studied, political science. And And then he was supposed to go meet with his counselor and talk about what he was going to do with his life after he graduated. And the counselor said, Joe, if you want to be a winemaker, you should be a winemaker. About that.
Yeah, follow your passion.
So he said he didn't care about whether he made any money or not. He was a winemaker. So he was living with his girlfriend over there, and she hadn't graduated yet. And so I called up my good friend Randall Graham and asked him, and said that my son might be interested, and he said, okay, I'll interview your son. And so Herb went over to Bonnie Doon, and they hired him. And so he worked over there for a couple of years until Melanie finished her degree. And then the two of them came back to Madera, and we hired Herb to be assistant winemaker on the condition that he went to Fresno State. And he took all the classes he could take on wine making and viticulture and everything. And then he did all that. And then he decided he just didn't want to work for us because he wanted to make dry wines. So he found a winery to work for up in Oregon, and he went to work up for a winery that was getting started up there called Cowhorn, and they were doing biodynamic, and he helped them get started. And then Cowhorn actually had financial problems and couldn't afford him or whatever, so he went over to this other winery called Troon, and they hired him. They hired him to be his assistant winemaker, and then he became the winemaker there when the winemaker quit. So
on the podcast,
we
had Troon on the podcast.
Yeah,
really?
The new owners.
Did they mention Herb at all?
It was the new winemaker there.
Yeah, right. So in any case, Herb was the winemaker probably before the one they had. But Herb, after a while, got some friends together and investors, and was able to start his own winery with some investors. And they used a leased facility. They rented some space in what used to be an old pear storage place deal. And so they had his winery did there, and he actually has done quite well. And he does wines on his own, under his own label, and also some custom crush customers.
Oh, yeah.
And just earlier this year, we financed a new winery for him, so he doesn't have the leased winery anymore, the leased facility.
Yeah, I saw it just came online in January of 22. Yeah.
So he's got his new winery on 100 acres of land that we've got there in the Applegate Valley. So he's off on his own now.
Oh, that's great.
Good. Yeah.
Success story. He's not
right.
He's not on the parents' goal anymore. No, that's great. And that's a dry Rhone varietals is what he
specializes in Rhone grapes, also Muscat. Also he does Cabernet Franc.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Yeah, I hear that Applegate Valley is really good for that. It's warmer area.
Yeah. Yeah, then compared with the rest of Oregon, right, where the Pinot Noir rules.
So, Andy, I gotta ask you. 79 is now 2022. How do you stay motivated over all these years?
Well, the problem is that we can't make enough wine, and we have to keep expanding. And right now we're at we're making about 170,000 cases. And we're trying to grow. We have enough land here. By the time we use a bunch of it for wastewater disposal, we can make maybe 300,000 cases. So we're looking at coming up at 300,000 cases in about 5-6 years from now. And yeah.
And where do you see
And so
where's the growth segment as you're doubling your production? Is it going to be in the Essensia?
no, it's all in the low alcohol.
All in the Electra, which
We
timing?
established a new brand too called Salt of the Earth,
Oh,
and which is doing very well. So we have Electra, red Electra, there's a rosé Electra, there's a Essensia Elysium, there's our vermouth, all under the Quady banner. And then under Salt of the Earth, which is a separate company, just 2 wines, Moscato Rubino and Florida Moscato.
oh, exciting.
With just a little bit more alcohol than Essensia Elysium, or than the Electra. More like 7.5 instead of 4.5.
Oh, I like it. So I was wondering on that low alcohol, we're starting to see these low alcohol beers, and they're calling them athletic beers. Are you going to embrace athletic wines?
Athletic?
Yeah,
really?
Lower alcohol. You can go on a run right afterwards.
So they're like, well, what was remember then there was a time when if the beer was below a certain amount, I don't know, underage people could drink it or something.
Yes.
Non-alcoholic beers.
No,
Well,
I think it was like a 3-2 beer. You could
yeah, something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
That was a while ago. But yeah, all the microbreweries by us are now having this athletic beer section where it's like the 3 and 4% beer.
So that's they're keeping them down below 4 then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then remember when the beers they were starting to make them like 10.
Yeah. it's the pendulum. We saw
right.
10%ers, but I love what you're doing with Electra there. That's exciting.
So yeah, we have a big, what has happened with us is that there's a huge slice of Americans who love soft drinks. Mm-hmm. They grow up on soft drinks, and it may also be that a lot of people just can't handle drinking beverages that are sour. Mm-hmm. See, and so there's a big market for wines that aren't sour and that are sweet instead. Mm-hmm. And so that's what. So if you make what we've done, actually, I guess, is to have something that is in that category, which also has a nice flavor profile that is very appealing to many Americans. And we know that's the case because we can't make enough.
That is so
we run out every year.
Oh man, I'm happy. I'm so happy it's a success. And so Andrew, as we kind of wrap down here, Andy, where can people find more about you and Quady's line of wines?
I'm sorry, Drew. What?
Yeah, where can people find out more about Quady Winery online?
Oh, probably just go to the website, quadywinery.com, be a place to start. Or there's the Salt of the Earth website too.
Yes, I've got to check that out. I'll be
Salt of the Earth wines.
Sounds good. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Drew. This has been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca.
Yeah, have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.